Chapter 6 of the Purple Land. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rick Vina. The Purple Land by W. H. Hudson. Chapter 6. I spent several days at the colony, and I suppose the life I led there had a demoralizing effect on me, for, unpleasant as it was, every day I felt less inclined to break loose from it, and sometimes I even thought seriously of settling down there myself. This crazy idea, however, would usually come to me late in the day, after a great deal of indulgence in rum and tea, a mixture that would very soon drive any man mad. One afternoon, at one of our convivial meetings, it was resolved to pay a visit to the little town of Tolosa, about 18 miles to the east of the colony. Next day we set out, every man wearing a revolver slung at his waist, and provided with a heavy poncho for covering, for it was the custom of the colonists to spend the night at Tolosa when they visited it. We put up at a large public house in the centre of the miserable little town, where there was accommodation for man and beast, the last always faring rather better than the first. I very soon discovered that the chief object of our visit was to vary the entertainment of drinking rum and smoking at the colony by drinking rum and smoking at Tolosa. The bibulous battle raged till bedtime, when the only sober member of our party was myself, for I had spent the greater part of the afternoon walking about talking to the townspeople, in the hope of picking up some information useful to me in my search for occupation. But the women and old men I met gave me little encouragement. They seemed to be a rather listless set in Tolosa, and when I asked them what they were doing to make a livelihood, they said they were waiting. My fellow countrymen and their visit to the town was the principal topic of conversation. They regarded their English neighbours as strange and dangerous creatures who took no solid food, but subsisted on a mixture of rum and gunpowder, which was the truth, and who were armed with deadly engines called revolvers, invented specially for them by their father, the devil. The day's experience convinced me that the English colony had some excuse for its existence, since its periodical visits gave the good people of Tolosa a little wholesome excitement during the stagnant intervals between the revolutions. At night we all turned into a large room with a clay floor, in which there was not a single article of furniture. Our saddles, rugs, and ponchos had all been thrown together in a corner, and anyone wishing to sleep had to make himself a bed with his own horse gear and toggery as best he could. The experience was nothing new to me, so I soon made myself a comfortable nest on the floor, and, pulling off my boots, coiled myself up like an opossum that knows nothing better and is friendly with fleas. My friends, however, were evidently bent on making a night of it, and had taken care to provide themselves with 3 or 4 bottles of rum. After conversation, with an occasional song, had been going on for some time, one of them, a Mr. Chillingworth, rose to his feet and demanded silence. "Gentlemen," he said, advancing into the middle of the room, where, by occasionally throwing out his arms to balance himself, he managed to maintain a tolerably erect position. "I am going to make a what-d'ye-call-it." Furious cheers greeted this announcement, while one of the hearers, carried away with enthusiasm at the prospect of listening to his friend's eloquence, discharged his revolver at the roof, scattering confusion amongst a legion of long-legged spiders that occupied the dusty cobwebs above our heads. I was afraid the whole town would be up in arms at our carryings on, but they assured me that they all fired off their revolvers in that room, and that nobody came near them, as they were so well known in the town. "Gentlemen," continued Mr. Chillingworth, when order had been at length restored, "I've been thinking. That's what I've been doing. Now let's review the situation. Here we stand, a colony of English gentlemen. Here we are, don't you know, far from our homes and country and all that sort of thing. What says the poet? I dare say some of you fellows remember the passage. But what for, I ask? What, gentlemen, is the object of our being here? That's just what I'm going to tell you, don't you know. We are here, gentlemen, to infuse a little of our Anglo-Saxon energy, and all that sort of thing, into this dilapidated old tin pot of a nation." Here the orator was encouraged by a burst of applause. "Now, gentlemen," he continued, "isn't it hard, devilish hard, don't you know, that so little is made of us? I feel it, gentlemen. Our lives are being frittered away. I don't know whether you fellows feel it. You see, we ain't a melancholy lot. We're a glorious combination against the blue devils, that's what we are. Only sometimes I feel, don't you know, that all the rum in the place can't quite kill them. I can't help thinking of jolly days on the other side of the water. Now, don't you fellows look at me as if you thought I was going to blubber. I'm not going to make such a confounded ass of myself, don't you know. But what I want you fellows to tell me is this. Are we to go on all our lives making beasts of ourselves, guzzling rum? I beg your pardon, gentlemen. I didn't mean to say that, really. Rum is about the only decent thing in this place. Rum keeps us alive. If any man says a word against rum, I'll call him an infernal ass. I meant to say the country, gentlemen. This rotten old country, don't you know. No cricket, no society, no baths, no anything. Supposing we had gone to Canada with our capital and energies, wouldn't they have received us with open arms? And what's the reception we get here? Now, gentlemen, what I propose is this. Let's protest. Let's get up a what-d'ye-call-it to the thing they call a government. We'll state our case to the thing, gentlemen, and we'll insist on it and be very firm. That's what we'll do, don't you know? Are we to live amongst these miserable monkeys and give them the benefit of our, yes, gentlemen, our capital and energies, and get nothing in return? No, we must let them know that we are not satisfied, that we will be very angry with them. That's about all I have to say, gentlemen." Loud applause followed, during which the orator sat down rather suddenly on the floor. Then followed Rule Britannia, everyone assisting with all the breath in his lungs to make night hideous. When the song was finished, the loud snoring of Captain Wriothesley became audible. He had begun to spread some rugs to lie on, but, becoming hopelessly entangled in his bridle reins, surcingle, and stirrup straps, had fallen to sleep with his feet on his saddle and his head on the floor. "Hullo, we can't have this," shouted one of the fellows. Let's wake old Cloud by firing at the wall over him, and knocking some plaster onto his head. It'll be awful fun, you know." Everybody was delighted with the proposal, except poor Chillingworth, who, after delivering his speech, had crept away on all fours into a corner, where he was sitting alone and looking very pale and miserable. The firing now began, most of the bullets hitting the wall only a few inches above the recumbent captain's head, scattering dust and bits of plaster over his purple face. I jumped up in alarm and rushed amongst them, telling them in my haste that they were too drunk to hold their revolvers properly, and would kill their friend. My interference raised a loud, angry remonstrance, in the midst of which the captain, who was lying in a most uncomfortable position, woke, and struggling into a sitting posture, stared vacantly at us, his reins and straps wound like serpents about his neck and arms. "What's all the row about?" he demanded huskily. "Getting up revolution, I suppose. All right. Only thing to do in this country. Only don't ask me to be president. Nor good enough. Good night, boys. Don't cut my throat by mistake. God bless you all." "No, no, don't go to sleep, Cloud," they shouted. "Lamb's the cause of all this. He says we're drunk. That's the way Lamb repays our hospitality. We were firing to wake you up, old Cap, to have a drink." "A drink, yes," assented the captain hoarsely. "And Lamb was afraid we would injure you. Tell him, old Cloud, whether you're afraid of your friends. Tell Lamb what you think of his conduct." "Yes, I'll tell him," returned the captain in his thick tones. "Lamb shan't interfere, gentlemen. But you know you took him in, didn't you now? And what was my opinion of him? It wasn't right of you fellows, was it now? He couldn't be one of us, you know, could he now? I'll leave it to you, gentlemen. Didn't I say the fellow was a cad? Why the devil doesn't he leave me alone then? I'll tell you what I'll do with Lamb. I'll punch his damned nose, don't you know?" And here the gallant gentleman attempted to rise, but his legs refused to assist him, and, tumbling back against the wall, he was only able to glare at me out of his watery eyes. I went up to him, intending, I suppose, to punch his nose, but suddenly changing my mind, I merely picked up my saddle and things, then left the room with a hearty curse on Captain Cloudsley Wriothesley, the evil genius, drunk or sober, of the colony of English gentlemen. I was no sooner outside the door than the joy they felt at being rid of me was expressed in loud shouts, clapping of hands, and a general discharge of firearms into the roof. I spread my rugs out of doors, and soliloquized myself to sleep. "And so ends," said I, fixing my somewhat drowsy eyes on the constellation of Orion, "Adventure the second, or 22nd, little does it matter about the exact number of them, since they all alike end in smoke, revolver smoke, or a flourish of knives and the shaking of dust from off my feet. And perhaps at this very moment Paquita, roused from light slumbers by the droning cry of the night watchman under her window, puts out her arms to feel me, and sighs to find my place still vacant. What must I say to her? That I must change my name to Hernandez, or Fernandez, or Blas, or Chaz, or Sandariaga, Gorostiaga, Madariaga, or any other aga, and conspire to overthrow the existing order of things? There is nothing else for me to do, since this Oriental world is indeed an oyster only a sharp sword will serve to open. As for arms and armies and military training, all that is quite unnecessary. One has only got to bring together a few ragged, dissatisfied men, and taking horse, charge pell-mell into poor Mr. Chillingworth's dilapidated old tin pot. I almost feel like that unhappy gentleman tonight, ready to blubber. But after all, my position is not quite so hopeless as his. I have no brutalized, purple-nosed Brighton sitting like a nightmare on my chest, pressing the life out of me. The shouts and choruses of the revellers grew fainter and fewer, and had almost ceased when I sank to sleep, lulled by a solitary, tipsy voice droning out in a lugubrious key, "We won't go home till morning." End of chapter 6.
Chapter 7. The Purple Land. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Alexander Brett. The Purple Land by W. H. Hudson. Chapter 7. Early next morning I left Tolosa and travelled the whole day in a southwesterly direction. I didn't hurry, but frequently dismounted to give my horse a sip of clear water and a taste of green herbage. I also called during the day at 3 or 4 estancia houses, but failed to hear anything that could be advantageous to me. In this way I covered about 35 miles of road, going always towards the eastern part of the Florida district, in the heart of the country. About an hour before sunset I resolved to go no further that day, and I couldn't have hoped to find a nicer resting place than the one now before me. A neat rancho, with a wide corridor supported by wooden pillars, standing amidst a bower of fine old weeping willows. It was a calm, sunshiny afternoon. Peace and quiet resting on everything, even bird and insect, for they were silent, or uttered only soft, subdued notes, and that modest lodge, with its rough stone walls and thatched roof, seemed to be in harmony with it all. It looked like the home of a simple-minded pastoral people that had for their only world the grassy wilderness, watered by many clear streams, bounded ever by that far-off, unbroken ring of the horizon, and arched over with blue heaven, starry by night, and filled by day with sweet sunshine. On approaching the house, I was agreeably disappointed at having no pack of loud-mouthed, ferocious dogs rushing forth to rend the presumptuous stranger to pieces, a thing one always expects. The only signs of life visible were a white-haired old man seated within the corridor, smoking, and a few yards from it, a young girl standing under a willow tree. But that girl was a picture for one to gaze long upon and carry about in his memory for a lifetime. Never had I beheld anything so exquisitely beautiful. It was not that kind of beauty so common in these countries, which bursts upon you like the sudden southwest wind called pampero, almost knocking the breath out of your body, then passing as suddenly away, leaving you with hair ruffled up and mouth full of dust. Its influence was more like that of a spring wind, which blows softly, scarcely fanning your cheek, a delicious, magical sensation, like nothing else in earth or heaven. She was, I fancy, about 14 years old, slender and graceful in figure, and with a marvellously clear white skin, on which this bright oriental sun had not painted one freckle. Her features were, I think, the most perfect I have ever seen in any human being, and her golden brown hair hung in 2 heavy braids behind, almost to her knees. As I approached, she looked up at me out of sweet grey-blue eyes. There was a bashful smile on her lips, but she didn't move or speak. On the willow branch over her head were 2 young doves. They were, it appeared, her pets, unable yet to fly, and she had placed them there. The little things had crept just beyond her reach, and she was trying to get them by pulling the branch down towards her. Leaving my horse, I came to her side. "I am tall, señorita," I said, "and perhaps I can reach them." She watched me with anxious interest while I gently pulled her birds from their perch and transferred them to her hands. Then she kissed them, well pleased, and with a gentle hesitation in her manner asked me in. Under the corridor I made the acquaintance of her grandfather, the white-haired old man, and found him a person it was very easy to get on with, for he agreed readily with everything I said. Indeed, even before I could get a remark out, he began easily assenting to it. There, too, I met the girl's mother, who was not at all like her beautiful daughter, but had black hair and eyes, and a brown skin, as most Spanish-American women have. Evidently the father is the white-skinned, golden-haired one, I thought. When the girl's brother came in by and by, he unsaddled my horse and led him away to pasture. This boy was also dark, darker even than his mother. The simple, spontaneous kindness with which these people treated me had a flavour about it, the like of which I have seldom experienced elsewhere. It was not the common hospitality usually shown to a stranger, but a natural, unstrained kindness, such as they might be expected to show to a beloved brother or son who had gone out from them in the morning and was now returned. By and by the girl's father came in, and I was extremely surprised to find him a small, wrinkled, dark specimen, with jet-black, bead-like eyes and podgy nose, showing plainly enough that he had more than a dash of aboriginal Chihuahua blood in his veins. This upset my theory about the girl's fair skin and blue eyes. The little dark man was, however, quite as sweet-tempered as the others, for he came in, sat down, and joined in the conversation, just as if I had been one of the family whom he had expected to find there. When I talked to these good people on simple pastoral matters, all the wickedness of Orientals, the throat-cutting war of whites and reds, and the unspeakable cruelties of the 10-years' siege were quite forgotten. I wished that I had been born amongst them and was one of them, not a weary, wandering Englishman, overburdened with the arms and armour of civilization, and staggering along, like Atlas, with the weight of a kingdom on which the sun never sets on his shoulders. By and by this good man, whose real name I never discovered, for his wife simply called him Batata, or sweet potato, looked critically at his pretty girl, and remarked, "Why have you decked yourself out like this, my daughter? It is not a saint's day." "His daughter indeed," I mentally ejaculated. "She is more like the daughter of the evening star than of such a man." But his words were unreasonable, to say the least of it, for the sweet child, whose name was Margarita, though wearing shoes, had no stockings on, while her dress, very clean certainly, was a cotton print so faded that the pattern was quite undistinguishable. The only pretence of finery of any description was a narrow bit of blue ribbon tied about her lily-white neck. And yet, had she been wearing the richest silks and costliest gems, she could not have blushed and smiled with a prettier confusion. "We are expecting Uncle Anselmo this evening, Papita," she replied. "Leave the child, Batata," said the mother. "You know what a craze she has for Anselmo. When he comes she is always prepared to receive him like a queen." This was really almost too much for me, and I was powerfully tempted to jump up and embrace the whole family on the spot. How sweet was this primitive simplicity of mind! Here, doubtless, was the one spot on the wide earth where the golden age still lingered, appearing like the last beams of the setting sun touching some prominent spot, when elsewhere all things are in shadow. Oh, why had fate led me into this sweet Arcadia, since I must presently leave it, to go back to the dull world of toil and strife. That vain low strife which makes men mad, the tug for wealth and power, the passions and the care that wither life and waste its little hour. Had it not been for the thought of Paquita waiting for me over there in Montevideo, I could have said, "Oh, good friend Sweet Potato, and good friends all, let me remain for ever with you under this roof, sharing your simple pleasures, and, wishing for nothing better, forget that great crowded world where all men are striving to conquer nature and death, and win fortune, until, having wasted their miserable lives in their vain endeavours, they drop down and the earth is shovelled over them." Shortly after sunset, the expected Anselmo arrived to spend the night with his relations, and scarcely had he got down from his horse before Margarita was at his side to ask the avuncular blessing, at the same time raising his hand to her delicate lips. He gave his blessing, touching her golden hair. Then she lifted her face bright with new happiness. Anselmo was a fine specimen of Oriental gaucho, dark and with good features, his hair and moustache intently black. He wore costly clothes, while his whip handle, the sheath of his long knife, and other things about him, were of massive silver. Of silver also were his heavy spurs, the pomp of his saddle, the stirrups, and the headstall of his bridle. He was a great talker. Never, in fact, in the whole course of my varied experience have I encountered anyone who could pour out such an incessant stream of talk about small matters as this man. We all sat together in the social kitchen, sipping mate, I taking little part in the conversation, which was all about horses, scarcely even listening to what the others were saying. Reclining against the wall, I occupied myself agreeably watching the sweet face of Margarita, which in her happy excitement had been suffused with a delicate rosy colour. I have always had a great love for the beautiful. Sunsets, wild flowers, especially verbenas, so prettily called margaritas in this country, and, beyond everything, the rainbow spanning the vast gloomy heavens, with its green and violet arch, when the storm cloud passes eastward over the wet sun-flushed earth. All these things have a singular fascination for my soul. But beauty, when it presents itself in the human form, is even more than these things. There is in it a magnetic power drawing my heart, as something that is not love, for how can a married man have a feeling like that towards anyone except his wife? No, it is not love, but a sacred, ethereal kind of affection, resembling love only as the fragrance of violets resembles the taste of honey and the honeycomb. At length, some time after supper, Margarita, to my sorrow, rose to retire, though not without first once more asking her uncle's blessing. After her departure from the kitchen, finding that the inexhaustible talking machine Anselmo was still holding forth fresh as ever, I lit a cigar and prepared to listen. End of chapter 7.
Chapter 8 of The Purple Land. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rick Vina. The Purple Land by W. H. Hudson. Chapter 8. When I began to listen, it was a surprise to find that the subject of conversation was no longer the favourite one of horse flesh, which had held undisputed sway the whole evening. Uncle Anselmo was just now expatiating on the merits of gin, a beverage for which he confessed to a special liking. "Gin is, without doubt," said he, the flower of all strong drinks. I have always maintained that it is incomparable, and for this reason I always keep a little of it in the house in a stone bottle, for when I have taken my maté in the morning, and after it one or two or three or four sips of gin, I saddle my horse and go out with a tranquil stomach, feeling at peace with the whole world. Well, sirs, it happened that on the morning in question I noticed that there was very little gin left in the bottle, for though I could not see how much it contained, owing to its being of stone and not of glass, I judged from the manner in which I had to tip it upwards when pouring it out. In order to remember that I had to bring home some with me that day, I tied a knot in my handkerchief. Then, mounting my horse, I rode out towards the side on which the sun sets, little expecting that anything unusual was going to happen to me that day. But thus it often is, for no man, however learned he may be, and able to read the almanac, can tell what a day will bring forth. Anselmo was so outrageously prosy, I felt strongly inclined to go to bed to dream of beautiful Margarita, but politeness forbade, and I was also somewhat curious to hear what extraordinary thing had happened to him on that very eventful day. It fortunately happened, continued Anselmo, that I had that morning saddled the best of my cream noses, for on that horse I could say without fear of contradiction, I am on horseback and not on foot. I called him Chingolo, a name which Manuel, also called the Fox, gave him, because he was a young horse of promise, able to fly with his rider. Manuel had 9 horses, cream noses every one, and how from being Manuel's they came to be mine I will tell you. He, poor man, had just lost all his money at cards. Perhaps the money he lost was not much, but how he came to have any was a mystery to many. To me, however, it was no mystery, and when my cattle were slaughtered and had their hides stripped off by night, perhaps I could have gone to justice, feeling like a blind man for something in the wrong place, and led her in the direction of the offender's house. But when one has it in his power to speak, knowing at the same time that his words will fall like a thunderbolt out of a blue sky upon a neighbour's dwelling, consuming it to ashes and killing all within it, why, sirs, in such a case, the good Christian prefers to hold his peace. For what has one man more than another that he should put himself in the place of Providence? We are all of flesh. True, some of us are only dog's flesh, fit for nothing, but to all of us the lash is painful, and where it rains blood will sprout. This I say. But remember, I say not that Manuel the Fox robbed me, for I would sully no man's reputation, even a robber's, or have any one suffer on my account. Well, sirs, to go back to what I was saying, Manuel lost everything. Then his wife fell ill with fever, and what was there left for him but to turn his horses into money? In this way it came about that I bought the cream noses and paid him $50 for them. True, the horses were young and sound. Nevertheless, it was a great price, and I paid it not without first weighing the matter well in my own mind, for in things of this nature if a person makes not his reckoning beforehand, where, let me ask, sirs, will he find himself at the year's end? The devil will take him with all the cattle he inherited from his fathers, or got together by his own proper abilities and industry. For you see, the thing is this: I have a poor head for figures. All other kinds of knowledge come easy to me, but how to calculate readily has never yet found an entrance into my head. At the same time, whenever I find it impossible to make out my accounts or settle what to do, I have only to take the matter to bed with me and lie awake thinking it over. For when I do that, I rise next morning feeling free and refreshed, like a man that has just eaten a watermelon. For what I have to do, and how it is to be done, is all as plain to my sight as this maté cup I hold in my hand. In this difficulty I therefore resolved to take the subject of the horses to bed with me, and to say, Here I have you, and you shall not escape from me. But about supper time Manuel came in to molest me, and sat in the kitchen with a sad face, like a prisoner under sentence of death. If Providence is angry against the entire human race, said he, and is anxious to make an example, I know not for what reason so harmless and obscure a person as I am should have been selected. What would you have, Manuel? I replied. Wise men tell us that Providence sends us misfortunes for our good. True, I agree with you, he said. It is not for me to doubt it. For what can be said of that soldier who finds fault with the measures of his commander? But you know, Anselmo, the man I am, and it is bitter that these troubles should fall on one who has never offended except in being always poor. The vulture, said I, ever preys on the weak and ailing. First I lose everything, he continued. Then this woman must fall ill of a calenture, and now I am forced to believe that even my credit is gone, since I cannot borrow the money I require. Those who knew me best have suddenly become strangers. When a man is down, said I, the very dogs will scratch up the dust against him. True, said Manuel, and since these calamities fell on me, what has become of the friendships that were so many? For nothing has a worse smell or stinks more than poverty, so that all men, when they behold it, cover up their faces or fly from such a pestilence. You speak the truth, Manuel, I returned, but say not all men, for who knows, there being so many souls in the world, whether you may not be doing injustice to someone. I say it not of you, he replied. On the contrary, if any person has had compassion on me, it is you, and this I say, not in your presence only, but publicly proclaim it to all men. Words only were these. And now, he continued, my cards oblige me to part with my horses for money. Therefore, I come this evening to learn your decision. Manuel, said I am a man of few words, as you know, and straightforward. Therefore, you need not have used compliments, and before saying this, to have said so many things, for in this you do not treat me as a friend. You say well, he replied, but I love not to dismount before checking my horse and taking my toes from the stirrups. That is only as it should be, said I. Nevertheless, when you come to a friend's house, you need not alight at such a distance from the gate." "For what you say I thank you," he answered. "My faults are more numerous than the spots on the wild cat, but not amongst them is precipitancy." "That is what I like," said I, "for I do not love to go about like a drunk man embracing strangers. But our acquaintance is not of yesterday, for we have looked into and know each other, even to the bowels and to the marrow in the bones. Why then should we meet as strangers, since we have never had a difference or any occasion to speak ill of each other?" "And how should we speak ill," replied Manuel, "since it has never entered into either of us, even in a dream, to do the other an injury? Some there are who, loving me badly, would blow up your head like a bladder with lies if they could, laying I know not what things to my charge, when, Heaven knows, they themselves are perhaps the authors of all they so readily blame me for." "If you speak," said I, "of the cattle I have lost, trouble not yourself about such trifles, for if those who speak evil of you, only because they themselves are evil, were listening, they might say, 'This man begins to defend himself when no one has so much as thought of drawing against him.'" "True, there is nothing they will not say of me," said Manuel. "Therefore I am dumb, for nothing is to be gained by speaking. They have already judged me, and no man wishes to be made a liar." "As for me," I said, "I never doubted you, knowing you to be a man honest, sober, and diligent. If in anything you had given offence, I should have told you of it, so great is my frankness towards all men." "All that you tell me I firmly believe," said he, "for I know that you are not one that wears a mask like others. Therefore, relying on your great openness in all things, I come to you about these horses, for I love not dealing with those who shake you out a whole bushel of chaff for every grain of corn." "But, Manuel," said I, "you know that I am not made of gold, and that the mines of Peru were not left to me for an inheritance. You ask a high price for your horses." "I do not deny it," he replied, "but you are not one to stop your ears against reason and poverty when they speak. My horses are my only wealth and happiness, and I have no glory but them." "Frankly, then," I answered, "to morrow I will tell you yes or no." "Let it be as you say. But, friend, if you will close with me to night, I will abate something from the price." "If you wish to abate anything," said I, "let it be to morrow, for I have accounts to make up to night, and 1,000 things to think of." After that Manuel got on to his horse and rode away. It was black and rainy, but he had never needed moon or lantern to find what he sought by night, whether his own house or a fat cow, also his own, perhaps. Then I went to bed. The first question I asked myself when I had blown out the candle was, "Are there fat wethers enough in my flock to pay for the cream noses?" Then I asked, "How many fat wethers will it take, at the price Don Sebastian, a miserly cheat be it said in passing, offers me a head for them to make up the amount I require?" That was the question. But you see, friends, I could not answer it. At length, about midnight, I resolved to light the candle and get an ear of maize, for by putting the grains into small heaps, each heap the price of a wether, then counting the whole, I could get to know what I wanted. The idea was good. I was feeling under my pillow for the matches to strike a light, when I suddenly remembered that all the grain had been given to the poultry. No matter, said I to myself, I have been spared the trouble of getting out of bed for nothing. Why, it was only yesterday, said I, still thinking about the maize, that Pascuala, the cook, said to me when she put my dinner before me, Master, when are you going to buy some grain for the fowls? How can you expect the soup to be good when there is not even an egg to put in it? Then there is the black cock with the twisted toe, one of the second brood the spotted hen raised last summer, though the foxes carried off no less than 3 hens from the very bushes where she was sitting. He has been going round with drooping wings all day, so that I verily believe he is going to have the pip, and if any epidemic comes amongst the fowls, as there was in neighbour Gumesinda's the year before last, you may be sure it will only be for want of corn. And the strangest thing is, and it is quite true, though you may doubt it, for neighbour Gumesinda told me only yesterday, when she came to ask me for some parsley, because, as you know very well, her own was all rooted up when the pigs broke into her garden last October. Well, sir, she says the epidemic which swept off 27 of her best fowls in 1 week began by a black cock with a broken toe, just like ours, beginning to droop its wings as if it had the pip. May all the demons take this woman, I cried, throwing down the spoon I had been using, with her chatter about eggs and pip and neighbour Gumesinda, and I know not what besides. Do you think I have nothing to do but to gallop about the country looking for maize, when it is not to be had for its weight in gold at this season, and all because a sickly spotted hen is likely to have the pip? I have said no such thing, retorted Pascuala, raising her voice as women do. Either you are not paying proper attention to what I am telling you, or you pretend not to understand me, for I never said the spotted hen was likely to have the pip, and if she is the fattest fowl in all this neighbourhood, you may thank me, after the Virgin, for it, as neighbour Gumesinda often says, for I never fail to give her chopped meat 3 times a day, and that is why she is never out of the kitchen, so that even the cats are afraid to come into the house, for she flies like a fury into their faces. But you are always laying hold of my words by the heels, and if I said anything at all about pip, it was not the spotted hen, but the black cock with the twisted toe I said was likely to have it. To the devil with your cock and your hen, I shouted, rising in haste from my chair, for my patience was all gone, and the woman was driving me crazy with her story of a twisted toe and what neighbour Gumesinda said. And may all the curses fall on that same woman who is always full as a gazette of her neighbours' affairs. I know well what the parsley is she comes to gather in my garden. It is not enough that she goes about the country giving importance to the couplets I sang to Montenegro's daughter, when I danced with her at cousin Teodoro's dance, after the cattle marking, when, heaven knows, I never cared the blue end of a fingernail for that girl. But things have now come to a pretty pass when even a chicken with a broken toe cannot be indisposed in my house without neighbour Gumesinda thrusting her beak into the matter. Such anger did I feel at Pascuala when I remembered these things, and other things besides, for there is no end to that woman's tongue, that I could have thrown the dish of meat at her head. Just then, while occupied with these thoughts, I fell asleep. Next morning I got up, and without beating my head any more, I bought the horses and paid Manuel his price. For there is in me this excellent gift: when I am puzzled in mind and in doubt about anything, night makes everything plain to me, and I rise refreshed and with my determination formed. Here ended Anselmo's story, without one word about those marvellous matters he had set out to tell. They had all been clean forgotten. He began to make a cigarette, and fearing that he was about to launch forth on some fresh subject, I hastily bade good night and retreated to my bed. End of chapter 8.
Chapter 9 of The Purple Land. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Purple Land by William Henry Hudson. Chapter 9. Early next morning, Anselmo took his departure, but I was up in time to say good-bye to the worthy spinner of interminable yarns leading to nothing. I was, in fact, engaged in performing my morning ablutions in a large wooden bucket under the willows, when he placed himself in the saddle. Then, after carefully arranging the drapery of his picturesque garments, he trotted gently away, a picture of a man with a tranquil stomach and at peace with the whole world, even neighbour Gumesinda included. I had spent a somewhat restless night, strange to say, for my hospitable hostess had provided me with a deliciously soft bed, a very unusual luxury in the Banda Oriental, and when I plunged into it there were no hungry bedfellows waiting my advent within its mysterious folds. I thought about the pastoral simplicity of the lives and character of the good people slumbering near me, and that inconsequent story of Anselmo's about Manuel and Pascuala caused me to laugh several times. Finally my thoughts, which had been roaming around in a wild, uncertain manner, like rooks blown about the windy skies, settled quietly down to the consideration of that beautiful anomaly, that mystery of mysteries, the white-faced Margarita. For how, in the name of heredity, had she got there? Whence that pearly skin and lithesome form, the proud sweet mouth, the nose that Phidias might have taken for a model, the clear, spiritual, sapphire eyes, and the wealth of silky hair that, if it unbound, would cover her as with a garment of surpassing beauty? With such a problem vexing my curious brain, what sleep could a philosopher get? When Batata saw me making preparations for departure, he warmly pressed me to stay to breakfast. I consented at once, for, after all, the more leisurely one does a thing, the sooner will it be accomplished, especially in the Banda Oriental. One breakfasts here at noon, so that I had plenty of time to see and renew my pleasure in seeing pretty Margarita. In the course of the morning we had a visitor, a traveller who arrived on a tired horse, and who slightly knew my host Batata, having, I was told, called at the house on former occasions. Marcos Marco was his name, a tall, sallow-faced individual about 50 years old, slightly grey, very dirty, and wearing threadbare gaucho garments. He had a slouching gait and manner, and a patient, waiting, hungry animal expression of face. Very, very keen were his eyes, and I detected him several times watching me narrowly. Leaving this oriental tramp in conversation with Batata, who with misplaced kindness had offered to provide him with a fresh horse, I went out for a walk before breakfast. During my walk, which was along a tiny stream at the foot of the hill on which the house stood, I found a very lovely bell-shaped flower of a delicate rose color. I plucked it carefully and took it back with me, thinking it just possible that I might give it to Margarita should she happen to be in the way. On my return to the house, I found the traveller sitting by himself under the corridor, engaged in mending some portion of his dilapidated horse gear, and sat down to have a chat with him. A clever bee will always be able to extract honey enough to reward him from any flower, and so I did not hesitate tackling this outwardly very unpromising subject. "And so you are an Englishman," he remarked, after we had some conversation, and I of course replied in the affirmative. "What a strange thing," he said. "And you are fond of gathering pretty flowers," he continued, with a glance at my treasure. "All flowers are pretty," I replied. "But surely, senor, some are prettier than others. Perhaps you have observed a particularly pretty one growing in these parts, the white margarita?" Margarita is the Oriental vernacular for verbena. The fragrant white variety is quite common in the country, so that I was justified in ignoring the fellow's rather impudent meaning. Assuming as wooden an expression as I could, I replied, "Yes, I have often observed the flower you speak of. It is fragrant, and to my mind surpasses in beauty the scarlet and purple varieties. But you must know, my friend, that I am a botanist, that is, a student of plants, and they are all equally interesting to me." This astonished him, and, pleased with the interest he appeared to take in the subject, I explained in simple language the principles on which a classification of plants is founded, telling him about the lingua franca by means of which all the botanists in the world of all nations are able to converse together about plants. From this somewhat dry subject I launched into the more fascinating one of the physiology of plants. "Now look at this," I continued, and with my penknife I carefully dissected the flower in my hand, for it was evident that I could not now give it to Margarita without exposing myself to remarks. I then proceeded to explain to him the beautiful complex structure by means of which this campanula fertilizes itself. He listened in wonder, exhausting all the Spanish and Oriental equivalents of such expressions as "dear me," "how extraordinary," "loxamussy," "you don't say so." I finished my lecture, satisfied that my superior intellect had baffled the rude creature. Then, tossing away the fragments of the flower I had sacrificed, I restored the penknife to my pocket. "These are matters we do not often hear about in the Banda Oriental," he said, "but the English know everything, even the secrets of a flower. They are also able to do most things. Did you ever, Sir Botanist, take part in acting in a comedy? After all, I had wasted my flower and scientific knowledge on the animal for nothing." "Yes, I have," I replied rather angrily. Then suddenly remembering Eyebrows' teaching, I added, "and in tragedy also." "Is that so?" he exclaimed. "How amused the spectators must have been! Well, we can all have our fill of fighting presently, for I see the white flower coming this way to tell us that breakfast is ready. Batata's roast beef will give something for our knives to do. I only wish we had one of his own flowery namesakes to eat it with." I swallowed my resentment, and when Margarita came to us, looked up into her matchless face with a smile, then rose to follow her into the kitchen. End of chapter 9.
Chapter 10 of The Purple Land. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rick Vina. The Purple Land by W. H. Hudson. Chapter 10. After breakfast, I bade a reluctant good-bye to my kind entertainers, took a last longing, lingering look at lovely Margarita, and mounted my horse. Scarcely was I in the saddle before Marcos Marcó, who was also about to resume his journey on the fresh horse he had borrowed, remarked, "You are travelling to Montevideo, good friend. I am also going in that direction, and will take you the shortest way." "The road will show me the way," I rejoined curtly. "The road," he said, "is like a lawsuit, roundabout, full of puddles and pitfalls, and long to travel. It is only meant to be used by old, half-blind men and drivers of bullock carts." I hesitated about accepting the guidance of this strange fellow, who appeared to have a ready wit under his heavy slouching exterior. The mixed contempt and humility in his speech every time he addressed me gave me an uncomfortable sensation. Then his poverty-stricken appearance and his furtive glances filled me with suspicion. I looked at my host, who was standing near, thinking to take my cue from the expression of his face, but it was only a stolid Oriental face that revealed nothing. An ancient rule in whist is to play trumps when in doubt. Now my rule of action is, when two courses are open to me, and I am in doubt, to take the bolder one. Acting on this principle, I determined to go with Marcos, and accordingly we rode forth together. My guide soon struck away across country, leading me wide of the public road, through such lonely places that I at length began to suspect him of some sinister design against my person, since I had no property worth taking. Presently he surprised me by saying, "You were right, my young friend, in casting away idle fears when you accepted my company. Why do you let them return to trouble your peace? Men of your blood have never inflicted injuries on me that cry out for vengeance. Can I make myself young again by shedding your life? Or would there be any profit in changing these rags I now wear for your garments, which are also dusty and frayed? No, no, Sir Englishman, this dress of patience and suffering and exile, my covering by day and my bed by night, must soon be changed for brighter garments than you are wearing." This speech relieved me sensibly, and I smiled at the poor devil's ambitious dream of wearing a soldier's greasy red jacket, for I supposed that was what his words meant. Still, his shortest way to Montevideo continued to puzzle me considerably. For 2 or 3 hours we had been riding nearly parallel to a range of hills or cuchilla, extending away on our left hand towards the southeast, but we were gradually drawing nearer to it, and apparently going purposely out of our way only to traverse a most lonely and difficult country. The few estancia houses we passed, perched on the highest points of the great sweep of moor-like country on our right, appeared to be very far away. Where we rode there were no habitations, not even a shepherd's hovel. The dry, stony soil was thinly covered with a forest of dwarf thorn trees, and a scanty pasturage burnt to a rust-brown colour by the summer heats. And out of this arid region rose the hills, their brown, woodless sides looking strangely gaunt and desolate in the fierce noonday sun. Pointing to the open country on our right, where the blue gleam of a river was visible, I said, "My friend, I assure you I fear nothing, but I cannot understand why you keep near these hills when the valley over there would have been pleasanter for ourselves and easier for our horses." "I do nothing without a reason," he said, with a strange smile. "The water you see over there is the Rio de las Canas, River of Grey Hairs, and those who go down into its valley grow old before their time." Occasionally talking, but oftener silent, we jogged on till about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when suddenly, as we were skirting a patch of scraggy woodland, a troop of 6 armed men emerged from it, and, wheeling about, came directly towards us. A glance was enough to tell us that they were soldiers or mounted policemen, scouring the country in search of recruits, or, in other words, of deserters, skulking criminals, and vagabonds of all descriptions. I had nothing to fear from them, but an exclamation of rage escaped my companion's lips, and turning to him, I perceived that his face was of the whiteness of ashes. I laughed, for revenge is sweet, and I still smarted a little at his contemptuous treatment of me earlier in the day. "Is your fear so great?" I said. "You do not know what you say, boy," he returned fiercely. "When you have passed through as much hell fire as I have, and have rested as sweetly with a corpse for a pillow, you will learn to curb your impertinent tongue when you address a man." An angry retort was on my lips, but a glance at his face prevented me from uttering it. It was, in its expression, the face of a wild animal worried by dogs. In another moment the men had cantered up to us, and one, their commander, addressing me, asked to see my passport. "I carry no passport," I replied. "My nationality is a sufficient protection, for I am an Englishman, as you can see." "We have only your word for that," said the man. "There is an English consul in the capital, who provides English subjects with passports for their protection in this country. If you have not got one, you must suffer for it, and no one but yourself is to blame. I see in you only a young man complete in all his members, and of such the Republic is in need. Your speech is also like that of one who came into the world under this sky. You must go with us." "I shall do nothing of the sort," I returned. "Do not say such a thing, master," said Marcos, astonishing me very much with the change in his tone and manner. "You know I warned you a month ago that it was imprudent to leave Montevideo without our passports. This officer is only obeying the orders he has received. Still, he might see that we are only what we represent ourselves to be." "Oh," exclaimed the officer, turning to Marcos, "you are also an Englishman, unprovided with a passport, I suppose? You might at least have supplied yourself with a couple of blue crockery eyes and a yellow beard for your greater safety." "I am only a poor son of the soil," said Marcos meekly. "This young Englishman is looking for an estancia to buy, and I came as his attendant from the capital. We were very careless not to get our passports before starting. Then, of course, this young man has plenty of money in his pocket," said the officer. I did not relish the lies Marcos had taken upon himself to tell about me, but did not quite know what the consequences of contradicting them might be. I therefore replied that I was not so foolish as to travel in a country like the Banda Oriental, with money on my person. To pay for bread and cheese till I reach my destination is about as much as I have," I added. "The government of this country is a generous one," said the officer sarcastically, "and will pay for all the bread and cheese you will require. It will also provide you with beef. You must now come with me to the Juzgado de las Cuevas, both of you." Seeing no help for it, we accompanied our captors at a swinging gallop over a rough, undulating country, and in about an hour and a half reached Las Cuevas, a dirty, miserable-looking village composed of a few ranchos built round a large plaza overgrown with weeds. On one side stood the church, on the other a square stone building with a flagstaff before it. This was the official building of the Juez de Paz, or rural magistrate. Just now, however, it was closed, and with no sign of life about it except an old, dead and alive-looking man sitting against the closed door, with his bare, mahogany-coloured legs stretched out in the hot sunshine. "This is a very fine thing," exclaimed the officer, with a curse. "I feel very much inclined to let the men go." "You will lose nothing by doing so, except, perhaps, a headache," said Marcos. "Hold your tongue till your advice is asked," retorted the officer, thoroughly out of temper. "Lock them up in the calabozo till the Juez comes tomorrow, Lieutenant," suggested the old man by the door, speaking through a bushy white beard and a cloud of tobacco smoke. "Do you not know that the door is broken, old fool?" said the officer. "Lock them up. Here I am neglecting my own affairs to serve the State, and this is how I am treated. We must now take them to the Juez at his own house, and let him look after them. Come on, boys." We were then conducted out of Las Cuevas to a distance of about 2 miles, where the Señor Juez resided in the bosom of his family. His private residence was a very dirty, neglected-looking estancia house, with a great many dogs, fowls, and children about. We dismounted, and were immediately taken into a large room, where the magistrate sat at a table on which lay a great number of papers. Goodness knows what they were about. The Juez was a little, hatchet-faced man, with bristly grey whiskers, standing out like a cat's moustache, and angry eyes, or rather with one angry eye, for over the other a cotton handkerchief was tied. No sooner had we all entered than a hen, leading a brood of a dozen half-grown chickens, rushed into the room after us, the chickens instantly distributing themselves about the floor in quest of crumbs, while the mother, more ambitious, flew on the table, scattering the papers right and left with the wind she created. "A thousand demons take the fowls!" cried the Juez, starting up in a fury. "Man, go and bring your mistress here this instant. I command her to come." This order was obeyed by the person who had ushered us in, a greasy-looking, swarthy-faced individual in threadbare military clothes, and in 2 or 3 minutes he returned, followed by a very fat, slatternly woman, looking very good-tempered, however, who immediately subsided, quite exhausted, into a chair. "What is it, Fernando?" she panted. "What is it? How can you have the courage to ask such a question, Toribia? Look at the confusion your pestilent fowls are creating amongst my papers that concern the safety of the Republic. Woman, What measures are you going to take to stop this before I have your fowls all killed on the spot?" "What can I do, Fernando? They are hungry, I suppose. I thought you wanted to ask my advice about these prisoners. Poor fellows! And here you are with your hens." Her placid manner acted like oil on the fire of his wrath. He stormed about the room, kicking over chairs and hurling rulers and paper weights at the birds, apparently with the most deadly intentions, but with shockingly bad aim, shouting, shaking his fist at his wife, and even threatening to commit her for contempt of court when she laughed. At last, after a great deal of trouble, the fowls were all got out, and the servant placed to guard the door, with strict orders to decapitate the first chicken that should attempt to enter and disturb the proceedings. Order being restored, the Juez lit a cigarette and began to smooth his ruffled feathers. "Proceed," he said to the officer, from his seat at the table. "Sir," said the officer, "in pursuance of my duty, I have taken in charge these two strangers who are unprovided with passports or documents of any description to corroborate their statements. According to their story, the young man is an English millionaire going about the country buying up estates, while the other man is his servant. There are 25 reasons for disbelieving their story, but I have not sufficient time to impart them to you now. Having found the doors of the juzgado closed, I have brought these men here with great inconvenience to myself, and I am now only waiting to have this business dispatched without further delay, so that I may have a little time left to devote to my private affairs." "Address not me in this imperative manner, sir officer," exclaimed the Juez, his anger blazing out afresh. "Do you imagine, sir, that I have no private interests, that the State feeds and clothes my wife and children? No, sir, I am the servant of the Republic, not the slave, and I beg to remind you that official business must be transacted during the proper hours and at the proper place." "Sir Juez," said the officer, "it is my opinion that a civil magistrate ought never to have any part in matters which more properly come under the military authorities. However, since these things are differently arranged, and I am compelled to come with my reports to you in the first place, I am only here to know, without entering into any discussion concerning your position in the Republic, what is to be done with these two prisoners I have brought before you." "Done with them! Send them to the devil! Cut their throats! Let them go! Do what you like, since you are responsible, not I. And be sure, sir officer, I shall not fail to report your insubordinate language to your superiors." "Your threats do not alarm me," said the officer, "for one cannot be guilty of insubordination towards a person one is not bound to obey. And now, sirs," he added, turning to us, "I have been advised to release you. You are free to continue your journey." Marcos rose with alacrity. "Man, sit down!" yelled the irate magistrate, and poor Marcos, thoroughly crestfallen, sat down again. "Sir Lieutenant," continued the fierce old man, "you are dismissed from further attendance here. The Republic you profess to serve would perhaps be just as well off without your valuable aid. Go, sir, to attend to your private affairs, and leave your men here to execute my commands." The officer rose, and having made a profound and sarcastic bow, turned on his heel and left the room. "Take these 2 prisoners to the stocks," continued the little despot. "I will examine them tomorrow." Marcos was first marched out of the room by 2 of the soldiers, for it happened that an outhouse on the place was provided with the usual wooden arrangement to make captives secure for the night. But when the other men took me by the arms, I recovered from the astonishment the magistrate's order had produced in me, and shook them roughly aside. "Señor Juez," I said, addressing him, "let me beg you to consider what you are doing. Surely my accent is enough to satisfy any reasonable person that I am not a native of this country. I am willing to remain in your custody, or to go wherever you like to send me, but your men shall tear me to pieces before making me suffer the indignity of the stocks. If you maltreat me in any way, I warn you that the government you serve will only censure and perhaps ruin you for your imprudent zeal." Before he could reply, his fat spouse, who had apparently taken a great fancy to me, interposed on my behalf, and persuaded the little savage to spare me. "Very well," he said, "consider yourself a guest in my house for the present. If you are telling the truth about yourself, a day's detention cannot hurt you." I was then conducted by my kind intercessor into the kitchen, where we all sat down to partake of maté and talk ourselves into good humour. I began to feel rather sorry for poor Marcos, for even a worthless vagabond, such as he appeared to be, becomes an object of compassion when misfortune overtakes him, and I asked permission to see him. This was readily granted. I found him confined in a large empty room built apart from the house. He had been provided with a maté cup and a kettle of hot water, and was sipping his bitter beverage with an air of stoical indifference. His legs, confined in the stocks, were thrust straight out before him, but I suppose he was accustomed to uncomfortable positions, for he did not seem to mind it much. After sympathising with him in a general way, I asked him whether he could really sleep in that position. "No," he replied, with indifference. "But do you know, I do not mind about being taken. They will send me to the commandancia, I suppose, and after a few days liberate me. I am a good workman on horseback, and there will not be wanting some estanciero in need of hands to get me out. Will you do me one small service, friend, before you go to your bed?" "Yes, certainly, if I can," I answered. He laughed slightly and looked at me with a strange, keen glitter in his eyes. Then, taking my hand, he gave it a powerful grip. "No, no, my friend, I am not going to trouble you to do anything for me," he said. "I have the devil's temper, and to day, in a moment of rage, I insulted you. It therefore surprised me when you came here and spoke kindly to me. I desired to know whether that feeling was only on the surface, since the men one meets with are often like horned cattle. When one falls, his companions to the pasture ground remember only his past offences, and make haste to gore him." His manner surprised me. He did not now seem like the Marcos Marcó I had travelled with that day. Touched with his words, I sat down on the stocks facing him, and begged him to tell me what I could do for him. "Well, friend," said he, "you see the stocks are fastened with a padlock. If you will get the key and take me out, I will sleep well. Then, in the morning, before the old one-eyed lunatic is up, you can come and turn the key in the lock again. Nobody will be the wiser." "And you are not thinking of escaping?" I said. "I have not even the faintest wish to escape," he replied. "You could not escape if you did," I said, "for the room would be locked, of course. But if I were disposed to do what you ask, how could I get the key?" "That is an easy matter," said Marcos. "Ask the good señora to let you have it. Did I not notice her eyes dwelling lovingly on your face? For doubtless you reminded her of some absent relative, a favourite nephew, perhaps. She would not deny you anything in reason, and a kindness, friend, even to the poorest man, is never thrown away." "I will think about it," I said, and shortly after that I left him. It was a sultry evening, and the close, smoky atmosphere of the kitchen becoming unendurable, I went out and sat down on a log of wood out of doors. Here the old Juez, in his character of amiable host, came and discoursed for half an hour on lofty matters relating to the Republic. Presently his wife came out, and declaring that the evening air would have an injurious effect on his inflamed eye, persuaded him to go indoors. Then she subsided into a place at my side, and began to talk about Fernando's dreadful temper and the many cares of her life. "What a very serious young man you are," she remarked, changing her tone somewhat abruptly. "Do you keep all your gay and pleasant speeches for the young and pretty señoritas?" "Ah, señora, you are yourself young and beautiful in my eyes," I replied. "But I have no heart to be gay when my poor fellow traveller is fastened in the stocks, where your cruel husband would also have confined me but for your timely intervention. You are so kind-hearted. Cannot you have his poor, tired legs taken out, in order that he may also rest properly tonight?" "Ah, little friend," she returned, "I could not attempt such a thing. Fernando is a monster of cruelty, and would immediately put out my eyes without remorse. Poor me, what I have to endure!" And here she placed her fat hand on mine. I drew my hand away somewhat coldly. A born diplomatist could not have managed the thing better. "Madam," I said, "you are amusing yourself at my expense. When you have done me a great favour, will you now deny me this small thing? If your husband is so terrible a despot, surely you can do this without letting him know. Let me get my poor Marcos out of the stocks, and I give you my word of honour that the Juez will never hear of it, for I will be up early to turn the key in the lock before he is out of his bed." "And what will my reward be?" she asked, again putting her hand on mine. "The deep gratitude and devotion of my heart," I returned, this time without withdrawing my hand. "Can I refuse anything to my sweet boy?" said she. "After supper I shall slip the key into your hand. I am going now to get it from his room. Before Fernando retires, ask to see your Marcos, to take him a rug or some tobacco or something, and do not let the servant see what you do, for he will be at the door, waiting to lock it when you come out." After supper the promised key was secretly conveyed to me, and I had not the least difficulty in liberating my friend in misfortune. Luckily, the man who took me to Marcos left us alone for some time, and I related my conversation with the fat woman. He jumped up and, seizing my hand, wrung it till I almost screamed with pain. "My good friend," he said, "you have a noble, generous soul, have done me the greatest service it is possible for one man to render to another. You have, in fact, now placed me in a position to enjoy my night's rest. Good night, and may Heaven's angels put it in my power to reward you at some future time." The fellow was overdoing it a little, I thought. Then, when I had seen him safely locked up for the night, I walked back to the kitchen slowly and very thoughtfully. End of chapter 10.
Chapter 11 of the Purple Land. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Purple Land by W. H. Hudson. Chapter 11. I walked thoughtfully back because, after rendering that unimportant service to Marcos, I began to experience sundry qualms of conscience and inward questionings concerning the strict morality of the whole proceeding. Allowing that I had done something very kind, charitable, and altogether praiseworthy in getting the poor fellow's unfortunate feet out of the stocks, did all that justify the cajolery I had practised to attain my object? Or, to put it briefly in the old familiar way, does the end sanctify the means? Assuredly it does in some cases, very easy to be imagined. Let us suppose that I have a beloved friend, an ailing person of a nervous, delicate organization, who has taken it into his poor cracked brains that he is going to expire at the stroke of 12 on a given night. Without consulting the authorities on ethical questions, I should, in such a case, flit about his room secretly manipulating his timepieces till I had advanced them a whole hour, and then, just before the stroke of midnight, triumphantly produce my watch and inform him that death had failed to keep the appointment. Such an acted lie as that would weigh nothing on the conscience of any man. The fact of the matter is, the circumstances must always be considered and every case judged on its own particular merits. Now, this affair of getting the key was not one for me to judge, since I had been a chief actor in it, but rather for some acute and learned casuist. I therefore made a mental note of it, with the intention of putting it impartially before the first person of that description I should meet. Having thus disposed of a troublesome matter, I felt greatly relieved in mind, and turned into the kitchen once more. I had scarcely sat down, however, before I found that one disagreeable consequence of my performance, the fat Signora's claim on my undying devotion and gratitude, had yet to be faced. She greeted my entrance with an effusive smile, and the sweetest smiles of some people one meets are less endurable than their black looks. In self-defence I assumed as drowsy and vacant an expression as I could summon, on the instant, to a countenance by nature almost too ingenuous. I pretended not to hear or to misunderstand everything that was said to me. Finally I grew so sleepy that I was several times on the point of falling off my chair. Then, after each extravagant nod, I would start up and stare vacantly around me. My grim little host could scarcely conceal a quiet smile, for never had he seen a person so outrageously sleepy before. At length he mercifully remarked that I seemed fatigued, and advised me to retire. Very gladly I made my exit, followed in my retreat from the kitchen by a pair of sad, reproachful eyes. I slept soundly enough in the comfortable bed, which my obese Gulnare had provided for me, until the numerous cocks of the establishment woke me shortly after daybreak with their crowing. Remembering that I had to secure Marcos in the stocks before the irascible little magistrate should appear on the scene, I rose and hastily dressed myself. I found the greasy man of the brass buttons already in the kitchen, sipping his matutinal mate amargo, and asked him to lend me the key of the prisoner's room, for this was what I had been instructed to do by the Signora. He got up and went with me to open the door himself, not caring, I suppose, to trust me with the key. When he threw the door open, we stood silently gazing for some time into the empty apartment. The prisoner had vanished, and a large hole cut in the thatch of roof showed how and where he had made his exit. I felt very much exasperated at the shabby trick the fellow had played on us, on me especially, for I was in a measure responsible for him. Fortunately, the man who opened the door never suspected me of being an accomplice, but merely remarked that the stocks had evidently been left unlocked by the soldiers the evening before, so that it was not strange the prisoner had made his escape. When the other members of the household got up, the matter was discussed with little excitement or even interest, and I soon concluded that the secret of the escape would remain between the lady of the house and myself. She waited for an opportunity to speak to me alone. Then, shaking her fat forefinger at me in a playful anger, whispered, "Ah, deceiver, you planned it all with him last evening, and only made me your instrument." "Señora," I protested with dignity, "I assure you, on the word of honour of an Englishman, I never suspected the man had any intention of escaping. I am very angry it has happened." "What do you suppose I care about his escaping?" she replied laughingly. "For your sake, sweet friend, I would gladly open the doors of every prison in the Banda if I had the power." "Ah, how you flatter! But I must now go to your husband, to learn from him what he intends doing with the prisoner who has not attempted to escape." With this excuse I got away from her. The wretched little Juez, when I spoke to him, put me off with a number of vague, meaningless phrases about his responsible position, the peculiar nature of his functions, and the unsettled state of the Republic, as if it had ever known, or was ever likely to know, any other state. He then mounted his horse and rode away to Las Cuevas, leaving me with that dreadful woman, and I verily believe that in doing so he was only carrying out her private instructions. The only comfort he gave me was the promise he made before going that a communication respecting me would be forwarded to the commandante of the district in the course of the day, which would probably result in my being passed on to that functionary. In the meanwhile he begged me to make free use of his house and everything in it. Of course, the misguided little wretch had no intent of throwing his fat wife at my head; still, I had no doubt that it was she who inspired these complimentary phrases, telling him, perhaps, that he would lose nothing by a courteous treatment of the English millionaire. When he rode away, he left me sitting on the gate, feeling very much disgusted, and almost wishing that, like Marcos Marco, I had run away during the night. Never had I taken so sudden and violent a dislike to anything as I then and there did to that estancia, where I was an honoured, albeit a compulsory guest. The hot, brilliant morning sun shone down on the discoloured thatch and mud-plastered walls of the sordid-looking building, while all about, wherever I cast my eyes, they rested on weeds, old bones, broken bottles, and other rubbish, eloquent witnesses of the dirty, idle, thriftless character of the inmates. Meanwhile, my sweet angelic child wife, with her violet eyes dim with tears, was waiting for me far away in Montevideo, wondering at my long absence, and even now, perhaps, shading her face with her lily hand, and looking out on the white dusty road, watching for my arrival. And here I was, compelled to sit, idly swinging my legs on the gate, because that abominable fat woman had taken a fancy to keep me by her. Feeling mad with indignation, I suddenly jumped down from the gate with an exclamation not intended for ears polite, causing my hostess to jump also, and utter a scream, for there she was, confound her, standing just beside me. "The saints defend me!" she exclaimed, recovering herself and laughing. "What made you startle me so?" I apologized for the strong expression I had used, then added, "Señora, I am a young man full of energy, and accustomed to take a great deal of exercise every day, and I am getting very impatient sitting here basking in the sunshine like a turtle on a bank of mud." "Why, then, do you not take a walk?" she said, with kind concern. I said I would gladly do so, and thanked her for the permission; then she immediately offered to accompany me. I protested very ungallantly that I was a fast walker, and reminded her that the sun was excessively hot, and I should also have liked to add that she was excessively fat. She replied that it did not matter; so polite a person as myself would know how to accommodate his pace to that of his companion. Unable to shake her off, I started for my walk in a somewhat unamiable mood, the stout lady resolutely trudging on at my side, perspiring abundantly. Our path led us down to a little cañada, or valley, where the ground was moist and abounding with numerous pretty flowers and feathery grasses, very refreshing to look at after leaving the parched yellow ground about the estancia house. "You seem to be very fond of flowers," observed my companion. "Let me help you gather them. To whom will you give your nosegay when it is made?" "Señora," I replied, vexed at her trivial chatter, "I will give it to the—" I had almost said the devil, when a piercing scream she uttered suddenly arrested the rude speech on my lips. Her fright had been caused by a pretty little snake about 18 inches long, which she had seen gliding away at her feet. And no wonder it glided away from her, and with all the speed it was capable of, for how gigantic and deformed a monster that fat woman must have seemed to it. The terror of a timid little child at the sight of a hippopotamus, robed in flowing bed curtains, and walking erect on its hind legs, would perhaps be comparable to the panic possessing the shallow brain of the poor speckled thing when that huge woman came striding over it. First I laughed, and then, seeing that she was about to throw herself for protection like a mountain of flesh upon me, I turned and ran after the snake, for I had observed that it belonged to a harmless species, one of the innocuous Coronella genus, and I was anxious to annoy the woman. I captured it in a moment, then, with the poor frightened creature struggling in my hand and winding itself about my wrist, I walked back to her. "Did you ever see such lovely colors?" I cried. "Look at the delicate primrose yellow on its neck, deepening into vivid crimson on the belly. Talk of flowers and butterflies, and its eyes are bright as two small diamonds. Look closely at them, señora, for they are well worth your admiration." But she only turned and fled away screaming at my approach, and at last, finding that I would not obey her and drop the terrible reptile, she left me in a towering rage and went back to the house by herself. After that I continued my walk in peace amongst the flowers, but my little speckled captive had served me so well that I would not release it. It occurred to me that if I kept it on my person it might serve as a sort of talisman to protect me from the disagreeable attentions of the señora. Finding that it was a very sly little snaky, and like Marcos Marco in captivity, full of subtle deceit, I put it into my hat, which, when firmly pressed on to my head, left no opening for the little arrowy head to insinuate itself through. After spending 2 or 3 hours botanizing in the cañada, I returned to the house. I was in the kitchen refreshing myself with a bitter mate, when my hostess came in beaming with smiles, for she had, I suppose, forgiven me by this time. I politely rose and removed my hat. Unfortunately I had forgotten the snake, when out it dropped on the floor. Then followed screams, confusion, and scuttling out of the kitchen by madam, children, and servants. After that I was compelled to carry the snake out and give it back its liberty, which no doubt tasted very sweet to it after its close confinement. On my return to the house, one of the servants informed me that the señora was too much offended to sit in the same room with me again, so that I was obliged to have my breakfast alone. And for the remainder of the time during which I was a prisoner, I was avoided by everyone, except Brass Buttons, who appeared indifferent to everything on earth, as if I had been a leper or a dangerous lunatic. They thought perhaps that I still had other reptiles concealed about my person. Of course one always expects to find a cruel, unreasoning prejudice against snakes amongst ignorant people, but I never knew before to what ridiculous lengths it will carry them. The prejudice makes me angry, but on this occasion it had a use, for it enabled me to pass the day unmolested. In the evening the Juez returned, and I soon heard him loud in a stormy altercation with his wife. Perhaps she wanted to have me decapitated. How it ended I cannot say, but when I saw him his manner towards me was freezing, and he retired without giving me an opportunity of speaking to him. Next morning I got up and resolved not to be put off any longer. Something would have to be done, or I would know the reason why. On stepping out, I was very much surprised to see my horse standing saddled at the gate. I went into the kitchen and asked Brass Buttons, the only person up, what it meant. "Who knows?" he returned, giving me a mate. "Perhaps the Juez desires you to leave the house before he is up." "What did he say?" I demanded. "Say? Nothing. What should he say?" "But you saddled the horse, I suppose?" "Of course. Who else would do it?" "Were you told to do so by the Juez?" "Told? Why should he tell me?" "How, then, am I to know that he wishes me to leave his beautiful house?" I asked, getting angry. "The question!" he returned, shrugging his shoulders. "How do you know when it is going to rain?" Finding there was nothing more to be got out of the fellow, I finished taking mate, lit a cigar, and left the house. It was a lovely morning, without a cloud, and the heavy dew sparkled on the grass like drops of rain. What a pleasant thing it was to be able to ride forth again free to go where I liked. And so ends my snake story, which is perhaps not very interesting, but it is true, and therefore has one advantage over all other snake stories told by travelers. End of chapter 11.